Hello everyone. Before we dive into tonight's accounts, I have a small request. If you find yourself looking over your shoulder or feeling that chill down your spine while listening, please hit the like button and subscribe. It's the best way to support the channel and ensures that these stories keep coming your way. I also want to hear from you. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and exactly what time it is for you. I've been doing solo backcountry trips since I was 19. Not car camping, not established campgrounds with numbered sites and bear boxes, actual deep woods, off-trail or near enough to it. The kind of trip where if something goes wrong, the best you can hope for is that someone notices you're missing before the third day. I'm not saying that to sound tough. I'm saying it because by the time this happened, I had enough experience to know the difference between a place that feels off because it's unfamiliar and a place that feels off because something is actually wrong with it. This was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan about 4 years ago, late August. I'd been planning a 5-day solo into a section of national forest that I'd been looking at on maps for a while. The kind of area where the forest service roads go in deep and then just stop, and whatever's beyond that you get to on foot. I drove logging roads for the better part of 90 minutes before I reached the end of the last one. Parked my truck at the edge of a 2-track that dissolved into brush, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The trail I was following, and I'm using that word loosely, was a marked path on the topo map that clearly hadn't seen regular use in years, maybe longer. The undergrowth had come back across it in most places, waist-high in some sections, and the first 2 miles I was walking through spiderwebs constantly. Not 1 or 2, constant, every few feet, which tells you something. Spiderwebs don't last in a place where people are moving through regularly. By the time I'd hiked 3 or 4 miles and I hadn't seen a single footprint, a single piece of flagging tape, nothing to indicate another person had been through this area in recent memory. The trail ran alongside a river, not a wide one, maybe 20 feet across, fast-moving and rocky the way UP rivers tend to be. The valley it cut through was beautiful, but the terrain was rough. Uneven ground, exposed roots, rocks everywhere. Not the kind of place you want to be picking your way through after dark. I was pushing it on time. The sun was already low when I came around a bend and found where the river forked, splitting around a gravel bar before rejoining downstream. On the near side of the fork, there was a flat section of ground, elevated slightly above the waterline, maybe 30 by 40 feet of relatively clear space. I could see from the trail that someone had been there. A tarp, a fire ring made from flat river stones. I crossed at a shallow section and went to look. The fire ring was well built, the kind someone takes time over. A log had been bucked nearby, clean axe work, not a hatchet, an actual felling axe, and sections of it were set around the ring as seats. The tarp was staked to the ground, not strung overhead, just laid flat, a bedroll under it. Then I started seeing the rest of it, spread across a wide area around the camp, not organized, not stored, just on the ground. A cooking set, a camp stove, a stuff sack with a sleeping pad partially unrolled, a first aid kit, the zipper open, a few items pulled out and set beside it, freeze-dried food packets, some opened and empty, several still sealed, a headlamp, a water filter, Everything you'd expect to find in a serious backpacker's kit. All of it present. All of it scattered like it had been set down in pieces and never picked back up. The pack itself was nowhere. I walked the whole perimeter of the site looking for it, nothing. Down by the river, there was a pile of clothes. Hiking pants, a base layer, wool socks. They were wet in a way that wasn't from the river, saturated and matted from rain. There'd been a hard rain 2 nights before I arrived. Whatever those clothes had been through, they'd been sitting there through, at least that rain, and hadn't been moved since. A camp towel hung from a branch above the pile, still damp. On the other side of a hemlock stand, maybe 40 feet from the main camp, I found where someone had been using the area as a latrine. You can date that kind of thing roughly, if you know what you're looking for. Based on what I saw, it had been in use for somewhere between 10 days and 2 weeks. Regular use. Someone had been at this site for a long time. The last thing I found was the structure. I almost walked past it. It was built between 4 hemlocks at the edge of the flat, and the saplings it was made from were close enough in color to the surrounding brush that it blended in until I was right next to it. It was a cube, roughly 4 feet on each side, framed out along the edges with saplings lashed at the corners, with diagonal cross members on each face. The construction was deliberate, not something someone threw together in an hour. Someone had taken time on it and had some understanding of how to build it, but it wasn't functional in any obvious way. The gaps between the saplings were wide enough that nothing would have been contained inside it, and it wasn't sturdy enough to hold much weight. It wasn't a food cache. It wasn't a shelter. I stood next to it for a while, trying to work out what it was supposed to be, and I still don't have an answer for that. By the time I'd finished walking the site, the light was going fast. I had maybe 30 minutes before I'd be navigating by headlamp, and the trail I'd come in on was barely navigable in daylight. Making 6 miles back over that terrain in the dark was not something I was willing to do, so I stayed. I set up my tent on the far edge of the flat, as far from the structure as I could get while still being on level ground. I didn't make a fire. I ate something cold and sat in the door of my tent and listened to the river and the forest and tried to work through what I was looking at logically. The most reasonable explanation was that someone had a medical emergency, collapsed, needed to be airlifted or carried out, gear left behind. That would account for the scattered kit, the abandoned site. It wouldn't account for the 10+ days of latrine use with no one coming to pack the site out afterward. It wouldn't account for the structure. I had a fixed blade on my hip, the way I always do in the backcountry. I kept my hand on it for most of that night, not because I had a specific thing I was afraid of. There was no rational specific threat I could point to. It was more that the site had a quality I couldn't resolve. Not the emptiness of a place no one had been, but the emptiness as of a place someone had been for a long time and then was suddenly not. I left at first light. I've been back into the UP. Since then, different areas. I still do solo trips. But that section of river, that fork, I've pulled the topo map out a few times and looked at it, and each time I fold it back up without planning a return. There are a lot of places in those woods I haven't been yet. That one I've been to. I don't need to go back. My family camped every summer when I was a kid. My parents were the type who believed a week outdoors did more for you than anything a school could offer, and I didn't argue with that because it meant a week out of school. We did the same circuit most years, different sites, different parks, but always somewhere with trees and no cell service and my dad burning hot dogs over a fire. He was too proud to admit he'd built wrong. The summer I was 12, we drove down to Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina. My parents had found a dispersed site near one of the smaller creeks that feed into the Davidson River. Off the main campground roads, more isolated than where we usually stayed. My dad preferred it that way. He didn't like camping next to other people's generators and propane lanterns. If he was going to sleep outside, he wanted it to actually feel like outside. We had 2 tents, my parents in one, me and my younger sister in the other. We set up in the early afternoon, ate dinner while it was still light and I was asleep before 10. I don't sleep deeply in a tent the way I do at home. There's always the ambient sound of the creek or the wind moving through the canopy that keeps part of my brain half online. But I was out enough that I didn't hear whatever woke my mother up. What woke me was her voice. Quiet, almost no volume to it, just my name. I opened my eyes and the tent was lit in a pale, flat way. Overcast moonlight, enough to see shapes but not details. My sister was still asleep beside me. I could see into the other tent through the mesh inner panel. My mother was sitting straight up in her sleeping bag, completely still, not moving at all. My father was still on his side, asleep. I followed her eye line to the wall of our tent. There was a shape on the other side of the fabric. It was close enough to the tent wall that the moonlight was silhouetting it clearly against the nylon, the shape of a figure, hunched slightly, head low and tilted, what looked like long, thin hair hanging down from the sides of the head. It wasn't moving. It was just positioned there, at face height, as if it was looking in. I was 12 years old, and my brain did what a 12-year-old brain does. It produced the simplest possible interpretation of what it was seeing, and locked onto it completely. A person, an old woman, the way the silhouette read, hunched and peering in. I don't know why old woman specifically. Something about the shape of the head and the way the hair hung. I said something out loud. I don't remember exactly what. Something like, "Mom, there's someone outside." The shape moved immediately. Not fast, it didn't bolt. It shifted, stepped back, and then moved off to the left and into the dark. The sound it made as it left was what broke the spell. Hooves, 4 of them, on the rocky ground beside the creek, uneven and unhurried. A deer, a large doe, probably, with her neck extended toward the tent, ears forward. The shape of her head and the loose fur along her neck, producing exactly the silhouette I had locked onto as something else. She'd been investigating the tent the way deer investigate anything unfamiliar, slowly, directly, with no apparent concern for whatever was inside. My mother exhaled in a way that used her entire body. We sat in the tent for a few minutes, not saying much. My father slept through the whole thing. My sister slept through the whole thing. The creek kept going. Eventually, my mother said we should try to get back to sleep, and we did. The part I still think about isn't the shape itself. I know what it was. I've never been confused about that. It's the 10 or 15 seconds before I made noise and it moved, sitting in that tent in the dark with my mother completely frozen and that silhouette pressed against the fabric, not moving, looking in. There was nothing dangerous about it, but there was something about being looked at from outside in the dark, from something that could see you when you couldn't see it, that my body understood as a threat before my brain had finished processing the image. I've camped plenty of times since then. I always check the site for game trails before I pick a spot to put the tent down. I grew up in a small town in the North Cascades, the kind of place where the mountains are visible from the grocery store parking lot, and half the people you know hunt or fish or both. Camping wasn't a recreational choice when I was a teenager. It was just what you did on weekends when there was nothing else going on. By the time I was 17, I'd spent more nights sleeping outside than I could count, and I wasn't precious about it. No anxiety, no second guessing. The woods were familiar the way your own neighborhood is familiar. That summer, a group of us, 6 or 7 kids, ranging from 15 to 19, had driven up a Forest Service road to a spot we used regularly, a flat area near a creek with good tree cover and enough open ground to spread out. We'd been up there dozens of times. My friend Garrett and I had scouted a better fishing stretch about a mile further up the creek the last time we were out, and we'd been planning to break off from the group and set up separately near it. More fish, more quiet, no one finishing your food when you weren't looking. The problem was we'd only planned on one tent between the two of us, and by the time we got up to the fishing spot and started looking around, the tent was back with the main group and we'd forgotten to pull it out before we left. It was getting dark fast. We weren't going back. There was a large granite boulder at the edge of a clearing near the creek, maybe 8 feet tall, flat on one face. We gathered what we could and put together a lean-to against it. Branches, some dead cedar we found nearby, a tarp Garrett had rolled up in the side pocket of his pack that we'd both forgotten was there. It wasn't comfortable and it wasn't weatherproof, but it was enough to sleep under. And we got a fire going in front of it, and that was that. Garrett was out fast. He could sleep anywhere, always could. I couldn't sleep. I don't mean I was lying there restless. I mean something was keeping me awake in a way that felt external. That specific feeling of being watched. I don't know how else to describe it, where the back of your neck doesn't settle and your eyes keep going to the tree line on their own. I've had that feeling before in the mountains, and it usually means a predator is nearby. Working through weather, you're worth the trouble. Mountain lion, most likely. They're in that range and they do that. They'll sit on a ridge above a camp for an hour before moving on. Knowing that helped a little. I put more wood on the fire the way you're supposed to and sat up and kept my eyes moving. The clearing was maybe 60 or 70 yards across at its widest point. Full moon that night, bright enough that the far tree line was clearly visible, the individual trunks readable. Not full daylight, but close to it in terms of what you could make out. I was looking at the fire when some part of my brain told me to look up. There was a man standing at the far edge of the clearing. I don't know how long he'd been there before I noticed him. He was just standing, not moving, at the edge of where the tree line started, upright, facing our direction. I could make out the shape of him clearly, not the details of his face or what he was wearing, but the shape, the proportions, human, standing still and looking toward the fire. I didn't move. I want to be honest about what that felt like because I've thought about it a lot since. It wasn't fear exactly, not at first. It was something more primitive than that. The thing that happens before fear gets organized into a coherent response. My body went completely still the way prey goes still. My eyes locked onto him. My brain was doing something rapid and wordless in the background, taking inventory of everything. Where Garrett was, where the axe handle was, what was between me and the man, and how open it was. He didn't move for what felt like 2 full minutes, but was probably less than that, just standing at the tree line facing us. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. No hurry, no change in pace. He just turned and was gone into the dark behind the tree line. I reached over and shook Garrett awake. He came up fast the way people do when you wake them urgently. I told him in a low voice what I'd just seen. He sat up and looked at the tree line. Nothing there. He asked me if I was sure, and I told him I was sure. He had a .444 revolver in his pack that I hadn't known about. His older brothers borrowed without asking, the kind of detail you sort out later. He loaded it and set it on the ground between us, and we sat at that fire until the sky started going gray. I've told this story enough times that I've heard all the reasonable explanations. Hiker who saw our fire and came to check if we were okay. Hunter who changed his mind about approaching. Someone who got turned around and was trying to get his bearings. Any of those could be true. The man didn't do anything, didn't come closer, didn't make any sound. There's no rational reason to assume anything bad was intended. What I can't explain away is the stillness, the duration of it. The way he stood at that tree line and didn't announce himself, didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there watching a fire with 2 teenagers next to it, and then turned around and left. That's not what you do when you stumble across someone's camp and want to make sure they're all right. That's what you do when you've been watching for a while and you've seen what you came to see. I still go into the mountains. I grew up there, and I'm not going to stop because of one night that might have been nothing. But I don't go without a firearm anymore, and I'm not apologetic about that. Something changed in how I read open ground at night. Every clearing has an edge now, and I check the edge before I look at anything else.